Well, we have a celebrity among us, quickly crawling back into her pew. This church actually is blessed by an abundance of celebrities, defined as people whose lives mirror their convictions, and their convictions are tied directly to a spirit of healing the planet and its people. When you dedicate your life to simple living, prepared to witness the truth by living in service of the truth, you can't help but be noticed because you stand above the crowd. Even if you only stand as tall as Joan Gregory, you will still be noticed and honored. When Joan served on our board of trustees, keeping meticulous track of all minutiae in ways only a librarian is capable of doing, I remember asking her if she'd be willing to serve another 3-year term. "No," she said, "I have some really important work that I feel so committed to doing." And she did. And although selfishly the board could have used her trained eye and elephant-like memory, our church received instead the honor of having one of its members be awarded the Guardian of the Future. Wow, what a title. Guardian of the Future, for her pivotal role in the environmental movement, struggling so hard to preserve a future. Why does it need to be such a struggle? With extensive scientific evidence that increased carbon emissions are not environmentally sustainable, that truth ought to guide government and corporations towards acting responsibly as stewards of the planet. Instead, government and corporations offer a collective lie. It's a lie that claims that when enough economic growth is pursued without regulations, and power rests in the hands of huge multinational corporations, why, what will happen? Just great things. The people of the earth will enjoy progress and prosperity and peace. Is it any wonder, then, that an alarming acceleration of climate change is being denied by the leaders and executives of the corporations and banking industries? They're denying it because they actually have a pretty good deal. By consuming the Earth's finite resources, harvesting cheap labor, foods, metals, minerals, and timber, the deception generated is that America becomes more secure by global dominance, environmental degradation, and social destruction. While poor nations are willing to sacrifice their air, water, and forests for its people to earn low wages, America only stands to gain a better life at an affordable price. 2 weeks ago, the New York Times commented on how climate change just seems to have vanished, disappeared from our everyday concerns lexicon, our language. Even China and India are coming to terms with their responsibilities towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but in the United States, you hear nothing. It's not even on the radar. And maybe that's why we, who intuit the deceptions perpetrated by the power base of this country, maybe that's why we hand out awards to truth tellers. Speaking truth to justice is the catchphrase. At the heart of it lies the power of words to shape reality, the world, and our lives. Not speaking the truth undermines world community. Nowhere do we find a greater defender of truthful words than in Wendell Berry. In his essay, Standing by Words, he addresses, and I quote, the necessary and indispensable connections between language and truth, and therefore between language and deeds. Berry maintains that words are sacred. We dare not speak them falsely or lightly. Words that speak the truth are foundational to ethics. And when you think about it, it all comes down to words forming a truth by which we live. And thus words are directly responsible for the actions that we take. Now, philosophically, one of the greatest of all dilemmas arises when a person acts irresponsibly but claims, hey, I didn't know the truth. Is he off the hook because he was ignorant of the truth? In response to a philosopher who said, I say that what is done through ignorance is involuntary, as in, gee, I didn't know that. Thomas Aquinas argued nearly 900 years ago, and I quote, I answer that ignorance is consequent to the world insofar as ignorance is involuntary. The act of will is brought to bear on ignorance, as when a man wishes not to know. What a concept. A man wishes not to know so that he may have an excuse for sin. Aquinas calls this affected ignorance. And he cites the book of Job, chapter 21, verse 14. Job says, we desire not the knowledge of thy ways. Once we acknowledge truth, we must act differently from how we could pretend to act otherwise, or how we could pretend to act if we didn't know the truth. The idea of choosing not to know, isn't that an amazing concept? The idea of choosing not to know has been with us for a long time. And Aquinas didn't really like it any more than we find it inexcusable to say to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we desire not the knowledge of thy ways. Aquinas further states that ignorance is said to be voluntary when it disregards that which one can and ought to know. And ignorance of this kind, either when one does not actually consider what one can and ought to know, or when one does not take the trouble to acquire the knowledge which one ought to have, is at its core purely voluntary and the person guilty of negligence. Well, so this philosophical stuff may well be above the heads of Michelle Bachmann and Rick Perry. So maybe they have an excuse, I don't know. But the point is well taken. There is no excuse when individuals, or in this case a whole society, chooses not to know what can and should be known. The only way to counter the deceit, to counter the false words framed by those who are so invested in acquiring even more material wealth, the only option really is to speak the truth a role reserved for what our culture calls the prophetic voice, prophetic witness. Again, let me come back to Wendell Berry. Not only must words ring true, but deeds have to match the words. Hence his essay, Stand by Words. Now, one of the great allegories of all time, I'm sure I hope many of you have read this, Watership Down by Richard Adams. There's Hazel, a young and courageous rabbit whose younger brother Fiver sees a notice posted by property developers. Uh-oh. Property developers coming in where the rabbits live. Hazel takes this information to the head of the rabbit warren, but is readily dismissed as a doomster. Nobody likes to hear bad news. But Hazel and a small band of followers leave the warren of Saddleford, embark on a long journey in which they eventually find a new warren, stopping off in many warrens along the way. And so the book is filled with scary characters and incidents, and a reminder that when they reach the warren of the snares, the rabbits really don't want to leave because everyone there is eating so well and living is fine and easy. But Hazel knows the price that is paid for such opulence. You can't trust it. We got to move on and find the right place for us, the right habitat for us. And so she leads the rabbits onward. Let me add parenthetically that all the rabbits who stayed in Sandalford were killed by the developers. But Hazel and the rabbits who journey with her are heroic, not because they are strong, but because they have the courage to speak the truth, to obey the truth, and to live the truth. Joan Gregory is a kind of Hazel. You would never expect such a small, framed person, creature, individual to take such enormous actions and have a voice loud enough to be heard above the fray. Now, like Hazel, Joan tried to go through legal channels available to all good citizens, but when rebuffed, when those in power willfully choose not to know what can and should be known, Joan took another path, a courageous one, and her words were matched by her deeds. Now, Joan has been involved in our environmental ministry for a very long time in efforts to educate the public. Right from the beginning, many of us will recall her relentless announcements about getting the right kind of light bulb. And of course, she promoted all the recycling efforts that are now second nature to us all in this church. And she has motivated people to simplify their lives and make it clear that we were not born to this earth to control it, but to serve the planet as caretaker, steward, and here's the new word, guardian. Joan has been arrested for civil disobedience that all the while, I think all she merely wanted to say was that not speaking the truth undermines community, all communities, local, national, global. There is a sacred connection linking language to truth, linking truth to responsible action. If we are to act responsibly, we must first hear the truth, and secondly, be prepared to live in accordance with the truth. And if Joan's going to jail will help us as a society to discern the truth, then so be it. Thank you, Joan. But you know, It's not automatic. You go to jail and society wakes up, and it's just part of the process. It's something that any prophet or anyone who commits acts of civil disobedience can only hope for, that their actions will somehow stimulate and arouse a very indifferent public into action. Joan Gregory, you make this church very proud, not just for receiving an award, but because your actions always match your words. Thank you so very much, John.